Hi, my name is Victoria Findlay Wolfe and I'm a licensed designer with Sizzix. Today I'm here to show you one of my dies called the flip side die. This is another die that's going to give you many different options with different combinations just by color placement. An easy die to sew together, and I'm going to jump right in and show you how we're going to do that. So I have my die, which is going to work on the Big Shot Plus and the Big Shot Pro machines. I can cut up to 8 layers at a time. What I've done on this die, though, is to make sure, that I can lay my fabric across the sections in which I want to manipulate my color placement. So I'm going to lay 2 different colors of fabric across those 2 shapes, and on the opposite end of the die, I'm going to be laying my background fabric, this orange color that we see laying in front. So by doing that, as long as I make sure that I have no more than 8 layers, especially if the fabrics are overlapping a little bit at that point, I can go ahead and cut out all the parts that I'm going to need for this block. Okay, I'm going to roll that through, sliding my pads off because it lets that static go to the side. Now I'm going to have all the little pieces that I need for this. Okay, so here's some of my blades that I'm going to use. So this block is a traditional block, and it's based on a little breeches block, which used to have an applique center, but here we've taken that part out and we've taken away the Y seam. So we're going to have ease of construction when we're sewing this block together. And let me show you what do I mean when I'm talking about ease of construction. The die itself already has the little pieces so that they're dog-eared. And what I mean by that is that when I'm going to lie my first section on to my block, we're going to see this little orange dog ear of fabric that sticks out to the end. Anytime when we have a dog ear like that, we're looking at the line of my raw edge on the dark purple fabric, and here the orange angle that's coming in and hitting my purple fabric, that is making a connection at 1/4 inch. That's exactly where I'm going to put my needle in and start sewing. So if you've been sewing blocks for a long time and your points are always being sewn off, like on a star block, you're always looking for that line up so that you have 1/4 inch from your raw edge meeting up, so that when you put this needle into the fabric right there, you are going to have a perfect line up on the outside. Now on the opposite end of this shape, there already is a little dog ear already cut off, because now when I lay this purple on top, it lines up perfectly with that edge. So if I'm sewing 1/4 inch and sewing all the way across this 1/4 inch here, I'm always going to have perfect points on the end of my block. Okay, so I'm going to jump right in. This is the layout for this block. Again, here we can see the dog ears over on this side, so anytime when I'm just sewing these pieces straight across, they fit perfectly. I love that I can get a block perfectly pieced. Everything is already cut out and ready to go. I'm going to start by just sewing these little end units on. This block is actually made up of 4 triangles, so this is going to be 1 unit that we're going to sew together. After we get 4 of those units together, then we can construct the entire block. So I have my little fabrics that lie exactly on top of each other. I can go ahead and start sewing my 1/4 inch. Do a little back stitch. When you have all of your pieces cut out, you could actually be chain piecing all of those little units. Makes for really easy and fast construction. Okay, I would hit that with the iron. I'm going to finger press those little pieces for now. Now I can put in my middle piece. Again, the little dog ears off the end make this for an easy lineup, so I know exactly where I'm sewing that to either side. You're going to see that we want to put this onto this unit. On the short side, there's my little dog ear. I'm going to start from that spot. You may notice that I didn't even need to use a pin. These pieces of fabric will lie directly on top of each other, that I don't even need to do that. If you feel comfortable, more comfortable putting a pin in, you can certainly do that to hold it in its position. I find that for that short distance that I can just lay that right on there and sew it down. Okay, again, when I lay this unit on top, both of those have a dog ear already missing, which means it fits perfectly onto the longer arm of this design. Always making sure that when I start that those edges are lined up, and it's also lined up on the back side. So I'm just going to put my finger on that and hold that in its place. My seam allowance is already pressed over. And I'm going to let the feed dogs take the fabric from me. This is just some very easy, straightforward, straight seam piecing. And that is my unit. So now that we have that as a section, I'm going to hit that with the iron briefly to make it nice and flat. And then we're going to look at doing the construction of the block. So let's look at sewing these 4 sections together. When I lie these 2 units together, we're going to have an easy lineup at the beginning and at the end because of the dog ear. But we also have this one intersection here where we're going to pin so that that makes a nice clean corner. So let's look at how I do that. This is just a very simple little habit to get into when you're pinning. When I pin, I like to pin at a 1/4 inch because that's where I should be sewing anyway. This is how I'm going to make this seam line up evenly with this seam. So I do this one at a time. Oftentimes people like to nest them. That's one way to do it, but I like to nail it on the first try. If I pin it through the first seam and then pin it through the second seam individually, I know those seams are going to live together perfectly. So I'm going to go ahead and put a pin through that on the second seam at a 1/4 inch. So now when I start, again, the edges are going to line up nicely, and also at the end, because of the dog ear, it's going to be laying in there exactly where I need it to be. And now I can sew this unit together. I'm sewing up to the pin, so by looking at where the pin is going into the fabric, I can see that my needle should be heading straight for that pin. So I can sew up to it, and then I can hop over that pin and pull my pin out. If I pull it out too soon, I'm going to move those seams and then they're not going to line up. I like to pin it very well right away so that when I sew it, they're going to lie perfectly together. Okay, so I never have to take my seam ripper out. That's the plan anyway. All right, so I would be pressing my seam allowance this side. Can go one direction, and then I can nest and I can press the other seam on the other half going the opposite direction. Because now when I'm going to sew these 2 units together, I'll lay those right on top of each other. Again, I will pin a 1/4 inch through that seam, and I double check it. I make sure that that pin is coming right through the seam and then into the second seam at a 1/4 inch. Keeping that pin nice and straight and short means that when I bend it backwards, that those are going to be lying exactly where they need to. So you'll notice then we do have that same thing happening that we did on the 2 units where we need to match those seams. So we can grab 2 more pins. All right, there's my dog ears. They line up beautifully on that side, and the same thing will happen on the other side so that I can sew all the way across to one straight seam. Taking out that pin just as I'm getting up close to it so that nothing moves. Making sure my lineup is end. Again, you could put a pin at that beginning and end if you need to. I'm very used to just holding on to it. That way I know I'm letting the feed dogs take the fabric from me instead of me manipulating the fabric on my own. And now we have a completed block. Isn't that beautiful? It's such an easy block to sew together. I love this block. I want to be able to show you on the quilt behind me a lot of the different variations that you can do just with color placement within this quilt. Okay, so looking up here on the top, I've used 2 different blues to make the star pattern that comes around the side of the block, but I've changed 2 of the little arms into 2 various colors of orange. If I do that all the way across in 4 different blocks, I now get this circular pattern, which I think is a really easy fix to make it look like a much more difficult quilt. And it's just not. We're just looking at color placement. Even on the inside, the units that we did on the little orange block by pinning the little unit that needed to line up, instead of using two of the same color, I'm able to change the color and then get a little secondary little pinwheel happening on the inside. Okay, and then looking at some of the other units in this quilt, looking at your focus, maybe instead of focusing on the 12.5-inch block, maybe you look at it as 4 blocks sewn together, and that becomes the pattern in your quilt. So this time, keeping the edges of the block in the blue pattern, but changing both of the arms on 2 sides of that block gives me now, again, a whole nother secondary pattern. Okay, so we have a lot of different ways that you can treat it. Here's just the simple basic pattern. I'm just using 2 different colors, but dropping in a little surprise like that within the pattern of the quilt gives you something that's just really fun and playful. Okay, you could be doing them all the same in the same color placement, just doing it as a 2-color, using all purples and then just picking a pretty background. And then I want you to look at this piece for a moment. What we have here is, instead of putting our 4 blocks as we did here in this position, where all the points are coming to the inside, this time I'm taking 2 of the units and turning them around so that they're joining the triangle unit is making a connection. Now I have yet another pattern that still is going together the same way, but giving you something that looks even like it's a completely different die. The beauty is it's all the same die, it's the flip side die. And it's giving you a huge amount of options and having a lot of ease of construction, and that's what it's all about, because that's what makes it more fun.